Hello, everybody. As you're coming in, I see we've still got some folks coming in. Um, we'll just wait a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody is here. I'm watching you in the, I don't know what the official word for this view is, but it's the one that reminds me of the Brady Bunch, so that I can see you all as you come in. And it is just delightful to see all of your smiling faces and your pictures and your names coming up on the screen. It's just so nice to see everybody.
So oddly enough, I know it's called the gallery view.
The gallery, that's what it is. That's right. Thank you, Nabil.
Brady Bunch is so much better.
It just, here's the story of a college named Grossmont, So here we are.
Does that make us the minstrels in the gallery?
Maybe, Bill. Hi, Tate. Hi, Alexis. Hi, Gloria. I see Brian, and Christine, and Rodney. If we're not able to greet everybody in person, know that it's just because we've now got multiple pages in the gallery, and you're coming in faster than I can name you. Here's Patty, Jeanette, I see Marianne, Augustine, hi Joel, hi Courtney, hi Liz. Hi everybody. Okay. We're still gathering. It's a couple of minutes after. We'll just see. We'll see when the doorbells are starting to slow down a little bit. So a little bit about Zoom housekeeping for today. So your participants today or your presenters today are gonna be me, Lida, and Nabil. Cindy is helping us with managing the waiting room. Those of us who are not presenting are going to be monitoring the chat, just so if people have questions, we're going to be looking to see your hands raised. I won't be able to see hands going up, but Cindy and Lida will be able to see those and help us. So if you have a question, always feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to that as we go. All right, just a couple more minutes here, a couple seconds. It's so nice to see everyone for what I know is one of our annual I want to say ritual almost, a time when we can stop and gather and reflect on what has happened in the past year, and think about what's coming forward. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started, because I know we have a lot on our agenda today, and I want to make good use of your time. Our goal is that we are, instead of having what I think we're accustomed to, which was kind of a full day annual planning forum, our virtual annual planning forum is going to be spread out in a series across the week between today and next Friday. And we'll talk a little bit about that, opportunities for participation. Everyone is invited to come back for one of the small group sessions that are scheduled for next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We're asking folks to pre-register for that, just so we get a sense of how many. We're going to be doing some breakout discussions, and so we're trying to get a sense of how many breakout group facilitators we're going to need. So if you haven't pre-registered for one of those sessions, I think a reminder went out from Bernadette a little earlier in the day. So please, I hope you'll have a chance to join us. And then we'll have a kind of a wrap-up and a summary and synthesis of the work that we've been doing today and throughout next Friday. So all of that information is on the reminder that went out earlier. So today's focus, and really the focus over the next week, is to kind of think about how our planning will change or needs to change as we're making sense of the landscape after the pandemic. Because certainly the things that we planned for when we all did our annual unit plans and when we participated in those at the department level, the things that we were planning for, the kind of fall semester we were planning for was very different than I think what we see in front of us now. So this is really our opportunity to stop, take a breath, and recalibrate, kind of check our compass and get ourselves back onto some sort of north. So let's go ahead and get started. Our goals for today, we're hoping to discuss how COVID-19 has really disrupted the broader higher education landscape, and that'll be our context for planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's been happening across the country and in the state and in the region. I think we also want to stop and acknowledge our reactions related to the pandemic. This is a lot of change that we're experiencing in a very short time. I don't know about you, but that for me has been challenging. And I think it's important to stop and acknowledge that as a bit of sense making. And then we want to use the remainder of our time to think about what are the things that help us to stabilize that change. So what are the norms and the principles that we'll use to find sort of a constant, something resembling solid ground as we're moving forward into however we define the next normal. We might not be able to go back to the previous normal, but we'll need to identify and define the next normal. And that's a wonderful opportunity, but we need some stability, something to hang on to as we do that. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Nabil Abu-Ghazaleh to talk to us a little bit about the broader higher education context.
Okay.
And Nabil, are you ready for the next slide?
No, give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah, let me first start by saying hello and observing that there are 105 participants right now. And that I want to honor that. That's probably a larger number than we have in a normal year, in a year when we're relaxed and really focused on our traditional work, our mission, and so on. And to honor you by saying, even when we're distracted by these very difficult circumstances, Grossmont is showing up. And I'm not just saying that to sort of give us all a collective pat on the shoulder, but to say that the focus of this planning forum over the new format over the next week, the focus of this conversation, and specifically at this time, is about continuing to be at the core of who we are, Grossmont College, with the things that we value, with our vision, our mission, and most importantly, our values and our value statement, and that we are going to continue to navigate what have been and will continue to be, likely for some time, difficult circumstances. The challenge to us is to stay true to mission and to stay true to our vision of what we are really here for and how we work with each other. And that's not an easy thing. It's not going to be an easy thing. But that, at this time, the hard thing is what we need to step up to. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So what just happened, right? Any idea what we're looking at? That's not the North Star, right? Think back 60, 70 million years, big meteor lands in what is now the Yucatan, and over the next, however many decades, essentially the life on Earth changes because the dinosaurs, by and large, died off in the form that we think of dinosaurs. Of course, there are those who will point out to you that the birds are still here, and they're quite a successful collection of species, and they occupy many niches. But the dinosaurs ceased to exist, and something else emerged. So I looked this up in the Smithsonian, actually, because I couldn't really remember what it was called. But this little scavenger, insectivore, shrew-like mammal that had been around for a couple of 100 million years actually emerged. It's called Loxolophus, and a few other species that really weren't very successful under the reign of the dinosaurs, and find itself in an environment where its particular competitive advantages are tremendous, and mammals and eventually humanity emerges. Now, why am I rambling about this, right? And the reality is, it's because we're going to need to adapt. Now, I'm not suggesting we were dinosaurs. I'm not suggesting we are the the little scavengers that emerged from their little holes underground and took over the earth, but that the circumstances that we're under are calamitous. They're very difficult. They are very difficult, and we'll continue to be clear how difficult they are, both in terms of what we do and and our finances and the things we're going to have to deal with, but also because staying true to ourselves, and so we don't go extinct, we're going to have to continue to achieve that which we achieve using different methods, right? That we are an equity-oriented, student success-oriented, student-centered organization does not need to change. That what we do and how we do it in order to achieve our core mission and vision, that has already been changed dramatically. And kudos to everyone who's been adapting, and again, to those 100+ people who were in the room trying to continue the tradition of planning, right? And that if and when we find ourselves stressed and sort of feeling a little lost, we need to go back and remember mission and vision. That's who we are. We a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, grabbed ourselves by the bootlaces and pulled really hard and managed to levitate when we elevated ourselves into a new governance system that really changes the dynamic of who has a voice and how those voices are collected. We know we can do this, right? We have done it. We have evolved ourselves intentionally and under no external pressure. We decided as an institution, we're going to change because we're going to be better, because we want to focus not on finding information and figuring out how decisions are made, but so that we can do it better and more expeditiously, and with all the voices on campus coming together. If we can do that, we're going to under externally forced conditions, we're going to do just fine. Next slide, please. Now, I say we're going to do fine. I don't suggest that it's going to be easy, but that our hearts and minds are in the right place, right? That people are showing up to say, yeah, we, even now we continue to do planning. So, over the last couple of months, the whole world's really been feeling a lot of impact. It's been differential impact. It's been delayed in some countries more than others. Some countries have reacted with total disregard and are starting to feel pain. Other countries hit it really hard in a very painful way, but have saved themselves in say their poverty and difficult circumstances from what would otherwise be in poor, crowded areas calamity. And that in the U.S. we've seen a dramatic range of reactions from total lockdown to complete denial, and that this conversation will be echoing with us still for quite some time. We are not just one country of 50 states. We really are 50 states as part of a couple of hundred nations around the world that will continue to feed each other until. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday and said, until we treat this like mumps, measles, and rubella, right? Where everyone gets their immunity and their immunization at an early age, and it becomes part and parcel of what we're dealing with, right? But that, we are right now in what are likely third world conditions. So I came about my mumps, measles, and rubella immunity the honest way. I had those illnesses growing up in the third world, and yet 3 years later, my younger cousins had access to immunizations, and they didn't suffer those diseases. But we're in that moment where we are experiencing essentially a third world condition, right? And it's a shocker to us, and it's very difficult. So, you know, I'm just validating the experience we're having. But we're still an educational institution, and in California, we really are in this strange environment where, you know, much as we are trying to, you know, as a state collectively make adaptations and protect ourselves and so on, we're dealing with some who can shelter in place and some who can't afford to and are having to put their health and their lives at risk because they can't afford food and they can't afford shelter and just are in difficult situations. So again, the distance, you know, nationally, certainly in California and even in San Diego, the distance between you know, between segments of society is essentially exaggerating. Catherine, next slide, please. Right. So in our lingo, we say the inequities become more visible and more acute. That if you didn't have to start with, right, if you didn't have an education, the kind of work and the resources and the reserves, and an institution that can afford to protect you while you know, while things settle down, then you know, you were disproportionately impacted. Is that familiar? Is that language familiar? That's what we call inequity. We are living it as a society now in ways that Grossmont College has certainly been looking at, trying to understand you know, how our students are experiencing it. Now it's very visible. We know those who have to go to work and can't shelter in place. Early on, those who couldn't even afford or couldn't find a face mask to wear to protect themselves or to protect others from their potential illness, right? So that's where we are in the big picture in the world. It is now showing those inequities and those disproportionate impacts much more so that many of our students were already experiencing. I'll take that back full circle before I move back and say, and that's why our mission and our vision and our way of working with each other is so important. Now, just because and disproportionate impacts doesn't mean our problem is solved. Our budgets are going to suffer dramatically. We really don't know how bad the problem is, but you know, we keep reading you know, more and more clear communications from California that the revenues are going to be very bad. It's affecting how we plan to schedule our classes. Essentially, our enrollments, which were already down, are going to be dramatically reduced potentially, or they might spike potentially, right? I mean, you know, we really don't know what's going to happen. And that's a difficult place to be, because on the one hand, we can't really afford, as our budgets are cut, we can't really afford to offer a large number of sections in anticipation of those students who might come to us instead of going to university. And on the other side of it, we can't really afford not to offer instruction and continue to build up our enrollments as we move forward, so that we can regain the institution size and sort of fund the kind of institution, the size of institution that we had become as an 18,000 student plus institution. So, you know, we are going to have many conversations in the coming months about how we balance efficiencies to try and live within a budget that is going to be impacted, and maybe impacted beyond our wildest dreams into, you know, into a level that that far surpasses the cuts that have to be experienced before. That may happen at a time when students rush to us as well. And, you know, the conversation about scanning our environment and looking at, you know, how we continue to think equitably means that every aspect of how we run this institution is going to need to be carefully examined, and to narrowly focus everything we can on effectively being able to be here for our students. We're going to need to work closely with our partners in the K-12. You know, we are going to continue that outreach work very carefully, connecting with K-12 to make sure that students, especially those who are from disproportionately impacted environments, are going to get served. We need to, as a community college system, make sure that we are competing and collaborating, not just Grossmont and Kuyamaka, but all of us competing on quality and collaborating on the scale of understanding how we adapt in this new world. And frankly, the four-year institutions, which are struggling to see how they're going to operate as well, hoping that we continue to partner with them as we transfer students and watch for them not to engage in practices that try to undermine what we're doing. So, you know, it's sort of trust and verify kind of thing. And that's pretty typical of our relationships, but in a very changed environment. Catherine, in the introduction, talked about the new normal, right? Or I don't think that's the word you used, but you know, but you know, an environment that is going to be different, and not just a new environment, but one that is much more turbulent and shifting and uncertain. How do we think of campus even? How do we think of an environment where we've spent decades and centuries really honoring a physical campus and trying to look like, you know, the ancient universities that we modeled ourselves after, that are, you know, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200 years old, and yet now find that the physical campus is so much less important than the relationship between instructors and students in an environment. We've also learned to appreciate the value of those who provide supportive services as well, and that it's not just delivery of information, but really a wraparound, equity-oriented environment. How do we work on figuring out what are the critical technologies to make those available while not overdoing it simply because our resources are limited, with grasping at every possible technology? You know, what works? What can we adapt with, right? How do we reoccupy a campus, a physical campus, and yet take advantage of the lessons we've learned in the last couple of months? How do we prepare ourselves to I call it, you know, meet ourselves coming as we're leaving, right? In other words, we're trying to figure out how to come on campus, but we're also planning in the same breath what happens if we then have to leave, and perhaps repeatedly have to leave as there are spikes and infections and so on. How do we do all that? And most importantly, do it within a system of relationships that we have created. And I'm wrapping up by going where I started with. How do we do this while maintaining our vision of our working relationships, our governance system, our planful work that we do, where we're orienting ourselves around the needs of our students, especially those who are most disproportionately impacted, and how do we evolve collectively, purposefully, and in the right direction, whatever that direction is, because, you know, if we had the answers, this wouldn't be a major world. But how do we evolve ourselves now? It's not a natural selection process, it needs to be an intentional process. And the answer is simple. It's what we're here to do, which is we plan together. And that's what we're going to spend the next week doing. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I'm much more interested in hearing what others have to say. But I really appreciate an opportunity to share, you know, my thinking about what I'm seeing. And, you know, while I am, you know, decidedly very scared about the future, what I also want to, you know, to honor as our tradition and our, you know, very caring community that wraps itself around its students and its community. All right, thank you. Catherine.
Thank you very much, Nabil. I really appreciate the summary and the scan and the emphasis on mission, and that's something that we'll return to a little later in the hour together. But now I want us to just stop and think about what we're experiencing. Everything that Nabil just summarized for us, if you think back, this has all happened within the last 8 to 10 weeks. That's a lot of disruption and a lot of change in a very, very short time. And I think I started to say in the introduction, I feel sort of a little bit like I have whiplash from this. It's really hard. No one that I know of has lived through this kind of pandemic. At least, not since the 1918 flu, I think, have we seen this kind of a pandemic. And so none of us have done this before. We don't have the muscle memory. We don't have the routines worked out. It's really hard. And so I think it's very important for us to stop and acknowledge how we're feeling about what's happening. And if you're like me, you might have a lot of emotion, some of which varies depending on the minute. Some of it may be, sometimes I feel a little sad, a lot sad. I feel some grief. I feel some loss. I feel some anger. I feel a lot of frustration. I feel a lot of helplessness. And occasionally I see an opportunity and I feel a little tiny bit of excitement about the opportunity in the midst of all of that. So I just want us to take some time together and share in a way that lets us all see those emotions really quickly, how we're feeling. So what I'd like you to do, if you have a web browser or a phone, go to the address that you see here on the screen, www.menti.com, and then enter the code that you see. I'll give you a couple of minutes, or a minute or two just to get there. And we're going to build a word cloud together. You're going to see when you get there, there will be first a question that just asks, how are you doing personally? How are you as an individual person? How are you doing? How are things going with your family, with your people, in your broader community? Just how are you doing? How are you feeling? And we're going to share that out together and watch as we begin to build that cloud together. So go ahead and get there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to go get us our word. And then we will see what that's like. We can watch it build together.
Catherine, can you put the code back up that you have to put in?
Yes, I can. And I'll tell it to you while I'm doing that so you can see it. 643358. 634458.
Catherine, the second time you said it, you transferred.
Did I do it backwards? Okay, I'm sorry.
All right.
643358. And what you should see on your screen now, as our responses come in, overwhelmed, hopeful, frustrated, anxious, stressed, disconnected, worried, adjusting, thankful, confused, curious. I like that one. I like all of these. Thank you for sharing. Curious is jumping out at me. Yeah, frustrated, overwhelmed, anxious. Okay, I think we're starting to slow down a little bit. Oh, somebody put in the sad emoji. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take a picture of this. I'm going to take a screenshot because I want to make sure that we can capture this for our slides and for our recording and record. And as we're just sort of sitting with this, if anyone would also like to, we did it this way so that we could just share out anonymously. If there are things that you'd like to share in the chat, like to expand, that's fine. We may not have I want to make sure that over Zoomed, I see that too. Thanks for that, Jeff. I want us to switch now and think about how we're feeling. This was how we felt personally, how we were doing just as individuals and in our personal space. I want us to think a little bit now about how we're feeling professionally. And so you can go on if you haven't already. You should be able to use from your web browser where you entered your first words, you can move forward into the next question. So how are you feeling professionally? How are you feeling about the work that your department is doing or that your team is doing? What is coming up for you as you think about how you're doing professionally? Or your reaction to the planning landscape? I'm seeing hopeful, disconnected, challenged, overwhelmed again, productive, proud. I'm feeling proud too. Marathon, I think somebody said. Yeah, lack of communication, under-resourced, too much change, challenged but in a good way, innovative. There's a real mix. And as I mentioned before, sometimes I feel innovative and completely helpless at the same day, on the same day at different moments. So hopeful, you can feel hopeful and lost, hopeful and overwhelmed, all of those things simultaneously, and that's okay. This is a lot of change. As I did with the last one, I'm going to take a screenshot of this so that we see. We can keep this and build it into the record as we're moving forward. Yeah, and as we did last time, if there are things that you'd like to expand on in the chat box, feel free to do that. I see some folks are saying they're excited about the ways that they can connect with their content, their course content. People are feeling grateful for their job, inspired by their colleagues, fighting to overcome overwhelm. So there is a lot that's happening. And I think it's, as I said, I think it's really important for us to stop and just acknowledge how we're feeling in the midst of everything that's swirling around us. And so I really appreciate, very much appreciate that you're willing to take this time out of an overwhelming day, an overwhelming week, and pause with us and just reflect on how we're feeling as we start to be planning, and start to do planning together. Okay, let's go. I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll go back to our slides. So I was going to put the screenshots here. I don't think I want to take time to do that in the middle of our presentation, but when we fill these slides out, there'll be two slides with our anonymous word clouds. And I just want to come back to something that Nabil said as we were getting started. You know, in the midst of all of the changes that we're feeling, what does not change, and what I think can provide some stability for us as we're feeling the overwhelm and as we're feeling the lack of a sense of what the future is, because it's still in the middle of developing. What does not change is our mission and the focus that we have on equity and inclusion as we develop really exemplary learning environments, really supportive student services, innovative programs. What does not change is our focus on that. Those are the values that we come back to, and that we'll use to ground us going forward. So as we're planning, I would just encourage us all, and as we begin to feel overwhelmed, when we begin to feel overwhelmed, because I think it's probably a when, not an if, coming back to the mission and just remembering that this is who we are. And these are the things that are in our foundation and in our bedrock. And so they're things that will not change. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can honor the share out that we just did, and carry that into some norms for the rest of the planning week, and even beyond into the planning work that we do in the next few months. So I'm going to ask Lida now to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of those norms.
Well, hi everyone. It's good to see everyone on here. I'm gonna just start out by saying that this is strange to have a planning forum in this kind of way, and acknowledging people's emotions right now. People are feeling a lot of different things all at the same time. So thank you all for just being here. I'm gonna talk a little bit about our equity framework, and talking a little bit about how we can kind of what Nabil was saying about narrowing our focus on the student needs through equity, and really talking about how we can do that. In the next slide, you'll see some bullet points around how we can begin to do that around intentional planning. As Dr. Nabil was talking about, our hearts and minds are all in the right place. But if we don't have intentional conversations, these inequities that we're seeing will be exacerbated. This crisis has unveiled and exposed inequities in many ways, and we can't really turn a blind eye now. This is a new world for us. And so how we understand that designing for equity is really about this intentional planning and how we do that. First, it's really building in that time for self-reflection, that critical reflection, and that equity really begins with ourselves, and how that critical reflection is key into this environment that is so uncertain, and that it requires us to be adaptable. Also, we're hoping that this framework really helps others think deeply about the college structures that are within the control of the institution, thinking about how we listen to each other with humility, knowing that one person does not have all the information to make the right decisions, local decisions, alone. That we're here to challenge ideas, not people, thoughtfully and with grace, embrace and give criticism, and ask the why to uncover the root concern, and that we have to do this by being race conscious. We can't talk about the pandemic without talking about the historical systemic racism that we see now in our society. For our sort of working definition around equity, because this term has been thrown out a lot, and I know in our student success and equity committees, we've been talking a lot about equity principles, equity guiding principles. We've kind of talked about that in different constituencies. But for today, we're really talking about equity, that it takes into consideration the social identifiers, including race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc., that they do affect equality. And in an equitable environment, an individual or a group would be given what is needed to give them equitable advantage. This would not necessarily be equal to what others are receiving. It could be more or different. Equity is an ideal and a goal, but it's not a process. It ensures that everyone has the resources they need to succeed. So for our guiding question, before we kind of go into our framework, we're really thinking about this question. How does the current reality differentially impact historically underserved students at our institution? We must consider their experiences, academic and career outcomes, and social mobility in order to do that. So again, based on Grossmont's mission, vision, and values, this following guiding questions will help inform our equity-minded planning processes related to our annual unit planning and our local decision-making. So for some of you, you may have seen this equity framework. We have used this in our professional development events. This is sort of what has been guiding us through our Achieving the Dream work, and thinking about our strategic goals as well. So it's been shared pretty widely, but I'm just going to kind of go over it a little bit broadly. What this framework really ultimately helps us do is you will use this to establish the use of it as a mechanism to get input from each other, to ourselves, to your department, your units, and your division. Understanding that designing for equity is about intentional planning and practices at the college. It can be used as a tool to help others think deeply about college structures and all the principles that I just went over. You can go to the next slide, Catherine, please. So Estella Ben-Simone talks about using choice points. And these are really choice points where, as individuals, we make decisions. And these decision-making opportunities influence outcome. And when we're conscious of these choice points and the related impacts, we're less likely to replicate that status quo, and it opens up new possibilities for equitable change. So in your personal lens, really that going back to that critical reflection, it's really about who we are. What do we believe in? What do we do? What are the assumptions that we make of our students or of each other? But it's based on our upbringing and our lived experiences personally. How is that then infused into our professional work, in our delivery, the services that we provide, our practices, our policies, the curriculum, and the environments that we create? And then finally, it moves into that structural piece around college-wide institutions, policies, practices, and ultimately our planning structures. And so as we think about this individually, the goal here is that we can use this frame through organizational change so that the personal, from we get to who we are, becomes who are we. In the next slide, please, Catherine. It becomes through culture, professional, and structural, meaning that here we can see in ways that we shift the culture in this way. If we are taking the time to really critically reflect our own identities and what we might be missing, the biases, the stereotypes that we might have, then we can move in a direction that's more equitable and that we can see. So we will go this, I'll say this, you know, I can't really do this justice in 10, 15 minutes. This can be like a whole series of workshops. So it's really hard to kind of really dig deep, but we will be doing that in the second session next week. So I hope you can join us so that we can really dig deep, ask really critical reflection questions around this framework, so that we can serve students in a new way. And I know that we're all challenged in being innovative, but collectively we can work together to figure out how we can do that. I also want to mention that there are things here that, you know, you might be looking at this and saying, well, what's within my control and how can I do that? This is based on the assumption that we all occupy positions of influence and consequence. All of us do. And that we all play a role in local decision making, whether the conversations that we have, who we include in those conversations, what's talked about, what data we look at. And so thinking about this really as empowering ourselves to say, we have that positional authority to really think about our students in this way because they are relying on us right now more than ever.
Thank you, Lida. And as Lida mentioned, that there's so much more to the reflective framework that that she's presenting. And so in the sessions that we do next week, we'll explore some of these, some of the deeper questions around culture, professional practices, and structures as we're looking at some data that comes directly from we've done some qualitative analysis of the emergency applications. And so we'll look at some of that data and have some discussions about potential barriers that we see. And I noticed that there was a question in the chat about, as we see things that come up that we know our students need, what resources can we point them to? These are questions that I want to begin to explore. So there's an immediate piece there, and there's an immediate answer to some of the DE and tech, the tech resources that we want to provide to our students on the COVID-19 website and some other things that we can do institutionally. But these are the questions that I want us to get into next week so that we can really go back to our annual unit plans. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But go back to our annual unit plans and say, okay, knowing what we know now, how do we reprioritize and what do we need to act on very quickly from where we started? So, just as a reminder, initially when we were planning for this forum 2 to 3 months ago, we were thinking that this would be a time where we would be able to really share out of everything that came out of the AUP, or at least the high-level themes that were coming out of the AUPs across the college, and take a step forward. And I still want us to do that, and we're going to get to some of the high-level themes in a second. But just as a reminder, the AUPs are really designed to get us to what we're talking about structurally, or what Lida was talking about structurally. There's something that helps us reflect regularly at the structural, the professional and the structural level on the opportunities, challenges, and needs that we see emerging that are related to student success and equity. It's a way that we're able to document progress or changes related to some of the longer term goals that we all have through our program reviews. The AUP stands for Annual Unit Plan, Denise. Thank you for reminding me not to use acronyms. I'm sorry about that. But it's a way of documenting our progress as we go, capturing that, celebrating it, and saying, oh, here's something that we didn't know was going to be in our environment when we set that goal 6 years ago during our program review. So it's a way for us to keep our program review goals current, and identify and document critical issues and needs that emerge from year to year. I think when we were rolling this out, I may have actually said, we want our integrated planning processes to be something that's regular, cyclical, something that we can count on, but also something that allows us to adjust when an asteroid comes in from outer space. And I did not know that this was coming, and I did not know that we were going to use an asteroid metaphor for this, but when I brought that up. But really, that's what we want it to do. We want it to be flexible enough, and we want to be able to respond and have the data and thinking and reflection, so that when the annual unit plan, or when something comes up and hits us, we can go back to the annual unit plan, and it becomes a structure that we can use to ground ourselves and provide a little bit more stability. And then it provides critical information for institutional level prioritization and resource allocation processes. So as we're moving forward and thinking about how do we define the next normal and how do we plan for the next normal, the information that comes out of our annual unit plans can be very, very helpful for surfacing the things that are needed at the level of the department, the program level, up into a conversation at the institution level. So I want to share that, as we, in the CPI office, as we looked across, as we did a qualitative analysis of what you entered into your annual unit plans earlier or what departments entered into their annual unit plans earlier this term, we are already planning for the themes that emerge suggested to us that we're already planning for things that are going to help us in the coming months, and they're going to help us prepare for the fall and for what may or may not be beyond the fall. So I'm going to go through these themes, and rather than throwing them all at you all at once, I just wanted to take them kind of one at a time. So across the college, folks are already writing about how they would like to dive deeper into their data and really understand the barriers to success and equity that they may see or may not see, but want to see. So there's a lot of curiosity about what's in the data and about understanding it more. There's already a lot of willingness and curiosity about how can we expand the use of online technology and tools, either for instruction, for student engagement outside of the classroom, inside or outside of the classroom, and as tools for communication. So a lot of the departments, a lot of you wrote about how you were thinking about using Canvas in different ways, expanding online sections as needed or if possible in order to meet students' schedules, for example. Folks were already talking about ways of using Zoom to connect with services or workshops. So there's a lot of creativity in the use of technology, even before we went into an online modality, sort of college-wide. So that will serve us well. A lot of folks are also writing about how they are collaborating or wanting to collaborate with other departments across instructional departments or between instruction and student services departments specifically, as well as collaborating and looking for ways to collaborate with external partners, whether those external partners, and that varied, some of the external partners were nonprofit partners, some of them were K-12, some of them were transfer, a few state agencies, business agencies, but a lot of you are writing about how you're seeking to collaborate internally and externally to provide additional opportunities for student engagement and student success. So that's exciting. And as Nabil mentioned, that's something that will be very important for us moving forward. And then a lot of folks were also writing about the implementation of specific equity-focused practices. And I called out transparent assignment design here specifically because that one emerged really strongly through the scan. A lot of you are focused on that kind of work, which is helpful for both communication and for equity and success. There was a lot of discussion of facilities. I'm sure that's not a surprise. And a lot of the focus in the annual unit plans that was around facilities was around physical space. However, a lot of the purposes that you were writing about in terms of we want to expand this space for this reason, much of that purpose was around building community, either in the classroom or within the department and providing, department or division, I should say, and providing space for collaboration and community, both between the folks who work in the department and as a space for student engagement and community. It's really exciting to think about, yes, we were writing about facilities in the physical space, but really what's underneath that was how do we build space for community? How do we reimagine what we're already doing? So that energy and that excitement about thinking around that, I think will be helpful. We're already thinking in that direction. And then finally, there was a lot of discussion of staffing and course scheduling. And as with the facilities, I want to point out that what was underlying all of the requests for staffing, all the requests for course scheduling, was this emphasis on maintaining and increasing what we're doing, maintaining and increasing enrollment, maintaining and increasing success for our students, maintaining and increasing opportunities for engagement. So all of that is already in the water that we're swimming in. So it's already part of what we're thinking about. And just as a reminder, these were the common threads from the higher education landscape that Nabil spoke about earlier. And I think there is a lot of resonance between what is coming out of our annual unit plans and what's coming out of the higher education landscape more broadly. We are focusing on things that resonate with the trends that are emerging for the COVID-19 response. We are already in a position with our mindset and our thinking and some of the pre-COVID planning. We are already thinking about collaboration across systems. We're already thinking about ways to make the inequity, to visualize the inequities and address them. We're already thinking about how to use technology and communication infrastructures in new ways. And we're already thinking about how to build engagement in different ways with the facilities, both the physical facilities and some of the online structures that we have in place. We're thinking about how to do course scheduling differently. So I think as we're going forward into the rest of the activities and the additional reflection that we have planned for next week, these are some things that we can begin to build on and expand on in those conversations. So keep them in mind, and we'll have them with us in the group sessions next week as a place to start. So with that said, we are just about at the end of our time. So I just want to make sure that that we do a bit of checking to make sure I see that we have some comments emerging. I want to bring those into the sessions that we have next week to include them in the dialogue and the reflection and running them through the equity reflections that we're going to do. Just as a reminder, we have 3 sessions for session 2, or 3 options for session 2, and we've done them at different times, 1-hour sessions on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. This is going to be the same session each time, so you pick the one that fits best into your calendar. We're asking you to pre-register just because we want to know how many small group facilitators to have on hand for you. But we're going to be doing deeper reflection on some of the comments that emerged today, some of the comments that emerged through our word clouds, and deeper into the equity framework for planning. And then we're going to start to think about how this will shift and change updates to the annual unit plans for fall. So going into the fall, we want to give everybody a chance to provide a brief addendum, to go back, look at the annual unit plan for their department and say, this is what I planned before the asteroid came at us. Now that we have the asteroid here and we're starting to poke our heads out a little bit and look around, here are what the priorities are. Here's how I'm gonna prioritize what I said, or here's what I need to add based on what I need now. And then next Friday, we're going to have a report out of some general themes and findings so that we can introduce that to you for you to carry into your annual unit plan updates. In closing, I just, this is a quote that I actually have this on a bag from our national, that I got at our National History Museum. I love it so much. And it is really, it's, the folks that survive after the asteroid, the little mammal that poked its head out and kept going, or the dinosaurs that evolved into birds, they were not the strongest, but the most adaptable. And I think we have a lot of examples of ways that we as as a college, as a community, are so adaptable and so resilient. And I think that's important to remember, especially in times that feel unstable. So thank you. We can do this. And we can do this to help those who need us the most. And I will see you next week. Thank you so much for being here.